Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we get stuck into the chaos, the data, and all the drama of a massive event and, well, try to make some sense of it all.
And this time, you've supplied us with an incredible stack of sources.
An absolute mountain. Everything from live reports, detailed race analysis, and, of course, the Havaro, very passionate post-race discussions from the final title-deciding race of the 2025 Formula One season.
Indeed. We're here to unpack that Abu Dhabi Grand Prix finale. I mean, the sheer drama leading into it, with 3 drivers still in contention, it gave us one of the most anticipated weekends in a long, long time.
Right, so our mission today is pretty straightforward.
We want to look past the champagne and the immediate celebrations and focus not just on who won, but on the how. The strategy, the fan fury, the team orders, and that razor-thin margin that defined the whole season.
And when we say razor-thin, we really mean it. A 2-point gap is just, it's staggering.
It is.
So let's just lay out the core facts straight away, because on paper, it looks simple. Max Verstappen won the race, and he did it in commanding fashion.
He did.
But by finishing third, Lando Norris clinched the 2025 FIA Drivers' World Championship. The final margin, a tiny, almost anticlimactic 2 points.
That 2-point gap, it's not just significant for how close the season was, is it? It's about the bigger picture of the sport. Lando Norris is the first champion from outside Red Bull or Mercedes in 15 years.
15 years. Just think about that for a second. That is a huge era of dominance that has just been broken.
Absolutely. A whole generation of fans has known nothing else. So it's a monumental shift, and the fact that it came down to a single pass or maybe a single team order from months ago,
Right.
well, that makes this deep dive absolutely critical.
Okay, let's get into it then. The end of an era, the start of another, all balanced on 2 little points. We'll start with how the stage was set in Section 1. When you talk about Abu Dhabi, the track itself always comes with a bit of baggage, doesn't it?
Really does.
Our sources immediately point out that a lot of fans really aren't keen on it. You see words like underwhelming, or my personal favorite, a glorified test track.
Which is not what you want for a title decider. There was a real expectation of a snooze fest even before the race started, wasn't there, just because of the nature of the circuit.
Yeah, that expectation was definitely hanging in the air. Yas Marina, even after they changed the layout a few years back, it's just not famous for wheel-to-wheel action, is it?
No, not at all. But then you had this peculiar, almost superstitious statistic hanging over the whole weekend, which I think added a whole other layer of psychological pressure.
Oh, you mean the pole sitter stat?
Exactly. Since 2015, for 10 straight years, the driver on pole position at Abu Dhabi has gone on to win the race. 10 years.
That's mad. So whoever got pole, you sort of felt they already had one hand on the winner's trophy.
Precisely. It put monumental pressure on nailing that one perfect lap in qualifying.
And you could just feel that tension when Verstappen put it on pole. It felt like all the momentum, both statistically and, emotionally, just swung straight to him and Red Bull.
It did. But let's look at that grid, because the fact that the 3 title contenders locked out the top 3 spots, that's a story in itself. It doesn't always happen like that.
No, it really doesn't.
They were just on another level all weekend. So Verstappen took pole with a 1:22.207.
And right there with him, Lando Norris in second.
With a 1:22.408. So close. And then Oscar Piastri, just behind his teammate, in third, with a 1:22.437.
Just look at those times. The 2 McLarens are separated by, hundredths of a second?
It's nothing.
And just over 2/10 between Norris and Verstappen on the front row. It was a proper knife-edge qualifying session.
Right.
It really felt like McLaren had the pace to genuinely challenge, not just play a supporting role.
Oh, absolutely. And we saw that pace all through practice, didn't we? You have to remember, Lando topped the timesheets in both FP1 and FP2.
That's right, yeah. George Russell went quickest in FP3. But the early signs were that the McLaren was properly hooked up around there.
It gave Lando the confidence, that the car was there. But Max, well, he just has that ability to pull out a magic lap in Q3 when it matters most.
He always does.
Yeah.
But the execution from all 3 of them, under that level of pressure, was just phenomenal.
It really was. And the sources pointed out that the tension wasn't just about those front 3 either. The fact Charles Leclerc qualified down in 5th was seen as a really important strategic piece of the puzzle.
Right. So why was P5 for Leclerc suddenly so significant? He wasn't in the title fight.
Well, because when the margin is just 2 points, every single position on track is a threat. P4 and P5 become hugely important.
Of course.
If there's a late safety car that bunches everyone up, or even just a slow pit stop for one of the McLarens, Leclerc is suddenly right there.
Wow.
He could have easily jumped Norris.
And a drop from P3 to P4 for Norris would have been catastrophic.
Would have lost him the championship. With Max winning, P3 was the absolute minimum he needed. P4 wasn't good enough. So Leclerc was this external threat that McLaren had to manage all race long.
The whole grid just felt magnetized by that fight at the front, didn't it?
Completely. And you could see that tension visually. There was a great little snippet in one of the reports about seeing Lando Norris's mother, Siska, in the McLaren garage.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
It was on lap 52, so right near the end, and the description was she looked as nervous as a mom can be.
And you can't blame her. It's such a humanizing moment, isn't it? It reminds you that underneath all the data and the engineering, it's just people and families going through this incredible stress.
Exactly. When the cameras pan to those faces in the garage, the engineers, the family, that's when you know the stakes are just astronomical.
They were just watching their son try to drive a perfect race with the weight of history and that mad pole sitter statistic just hanging over everything.
It had to be a perfect race, not just a fast one.
Which is why, despite the track's reputation for being a bit dull, the anticipation was just electric. You just knew one tiny mistake could undo an entire season of work. So, into the race itself. 58 laps under those iconic Abu Dhabi lights. The final result, as we said, was quite straightforward on paper.
Deceptively so.
Max Verstappen wins. Oscar Piastri comes home second, about 12.5 seconds back, and then Lando Norris in third, a further 4 seconds behind. Job done for Norris.
That's the headline, yeah. But the journey to get there was anything but straightforward.
No, the early laps immediately showed this wasn't going to be a simple cruise to the finish for Lando. His own teammate, Oscar Piastri, got past him for second place.
That's right, yeah, quite early on. That move immediately changed the whole strategic picture for McLaren.
So was that just Piastri having better pace at the start, or did McLaren kind of let it happen?
The sources suggest it was mostly down to pace and positioning. Piastri just got a phenomenal start, and while Norris was, rightly focused on keeping it clean and not tangling with Max, Oscar found the grip and just went for it.
And for McLaren, P2 and P3 is still the ideal scenario, I suppose.
It's perfect. It gives them control. Piastri then acts as a brilliant high-speed buffer for Norris, keeping the Ferraris and Mercedes well out of striking distance.
Right. Damon Hill, who was commentating, he summed it up perfectly, I thought. He said the race was not exciting, but still tense.
That's a great way to put it. The lack of on-track battling didn't matter because the tension was in the maths. Everyone was just driving to a number.
So what about the strategy? Most teams started on the medium tire, aiming for a one-stop. Pretty standard for Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, very standard. The first part of the race was all about Max trying to pull out of that 1-second DRS window from Piastri, which, to be fair, he did pretty quickly.
And McLaren's strategy was interesting. They blinked first, didn't they?
They did. They pitted Piastri first around lap 17, trying to pull off a classic undercut on Verstappen. It was an aggressive move.
But Red Bull were wise to it.
Oh, completely. They responded immediately, pitted Max on the very next lap, and just covered him off. It was a really decisive bit of strategy from them. Norris then stayed out a bit longer, pitting on lap 20, trying to give himself a tire advantage for later in the race.
And after that, the gaps just sort of stabilized for a while.
They did. The tension wasn't in the overtakes. It was in watching those little gap timers on the screen and listening to the radio for any hint of tire trouble.
And then came the moment that nearly blew the whole championship apart. The Yuki Tsunoda overtake.
Oh, this was explosive. This happened mid-race, and for a moment it looked like it could be a complete disaster for Lando.
So set the scene. Norris is trying to pass Tsunoda.
In the Red Bull sister car, yes. And the move gets flagged by the stewards for a potential rule infringement.
Specifically leaving the track and gaining an advantage.
Exactly. And the speculation just went into overdrive immediately. The thinking was, is Red Bull using Tsunoda here to deliberately slow Norris down, maybe even bait him into a penalty?
So what was the argument against Norris's move? Did he actually go off the track?
It was marginal. The argument was that he ran a little bit wide on the exit of the corner, maybe used a bit of the runoff area to keep his momentum up and make sure the pass stuck.
And the rule is you can't gain a lasting advantage by doing that.
Correct. The stewards had a look, but crucially, no penalty was given.
And that decision was widely seen as the correct call, wasn't it?
It was. The analysis from a lot of people, especially those concerned with, the integrity of the sport, was that penalizing Norris, there would have been a disaster. It would have It essentially validated the tactic of using a sister car to, well, to cheat, to deliberately block and interfere.
It would set a very dangerous precedent for future title fights.
A hugely dangerous one. So the stewards, I think, wisely stepped back from that.
I did see some pretty harsh comments about Tsunoda himself in the sources, though. Fans were not happy with him.
No, there weren't. One comment just said, "Good riddance, Tsunoda."
Why?
Then another said he couldn't even defend a single lap and on top of it got a stupid penalty for something else later on. It just shows how sensitive everyone is to any kind of perceived interference in a title fight.
Absolutely. But once that moment passed, the focus went straight back to tire management and just counting down the laps.
Yep. And this is where the race became a real nail-biter, just listening to the team radio.
This is where Norris had to manage his P3, but also keep an eye on Russell and Leclerc behind him.
And that's where you get these fascinating little technical insights. Around lap 45, Norris comes on the radio to his engineer.
And he asks about Piastri's tires. Is he struggling with graining?
It's such a clever question. Let's just quickly explain what graining is for anyone who might not know. So it's basically when the surface of the tire tears away in little bits because it's not at the right temperature. Those bits then stick back onto the tire, creating this really uneven, low-grip surface. It just kills your lap time.
So Norris is essentially asking his team, is Oscar vulnerable? Can I attack him for P2?
Exactly. Is there an opportunity here to get past him and give myself an even bigger safety cushion? And his engineer confirms that Piastri is having some issues with his rear tires.
Damon Hill even said on commentary he was sensing a little bit of blood for Oscar Piastri.
He was. But then McLaren's instruction comes through, and it's crystal clear.
Just keep it cool. No need to go all out now. P3 guarantees the title.
It's the ultimate example of risk management, isn't it? Don't get greedy. Just bring it home.
Although Damon Hill did make the point that sometimes it's better to keep pushing just to stay focused. Backing off can be when you make a mistake.
Which is a fascinating insight from a former champion. But McLaren took the safe option, and you can't blame them. They just told Lando to manage the gap to Leclerc.
And meanwhile, up at the front, Max was still pushing on. He got a second track limits warning on lap 52.
Which is incredible, isn't it? He's leading comfortably, but he's still driving right on the absolute edge. One more warning would have been a 5-second penalty.
He just can't help himself. It's just how he drives.
It is. And as all this was going on, Charles Leclerc started setting fastest laps.
That must have sent a few hearts racing on the McLaren pit wall.
I'm sure it did. In the end, he didn't have enough laps left to properly threaten Norris, but it was a scary reminder that it's never over until the checkered flag.
Right. Before we get to the aftermath, we should quickly mention some of the other good drives further down the grid.
Absolutely. Lewis Hamilton had a great recovery drive for Ferrari, from P16 all the way up to P8.
A good recovery drive from his misery of this year, as Damon Hill put it.
And importantly, those points helped Ferrari in the constructors and kept him ahead of Kimi Antonelli in the final driver's standings.
And a great result for Haas as well. A double points finish. Ocon P7, Bierman P10. That's huge for them.
Massive. And Gabriel Bortoleto picked up points for Sauber too, so lots of little battles being won. But really, all eyes were just on that one papaya car crossing the line in third place.
A massive historic moment, which was almost immediately overshadowed by what came next.
Which takes us neatly into Section 3 and the fan reaction.
Right. This is where we get into the fan reactions. And honestly, some of the drama here is better than the race itself. Lando Norris crosses the line. He's just become world champion.
A childhood dream realized.
And the first reaction from the pit wall just... It didn't land well, did it?
It did not land well. The universal focus point was the radio message from McLaren CEO Zach Brown.
Oh, the infamous world champion hotline.
That's the one, Lando. This is Zach from McLaren. Is this the world champion hotline?
And the fan backlash was immediate and brutal.
It really was. We've got quotes here calling it corny F, cringy-ass radio, and worst message you could have done.
One person just said Zach Brown is literally incapable of being cool. Another one I saw said, he had so long to think of what to say. And he says, that, haha.
And I think that's the core of it. It's the contrast between the raw emotion of the moment and what felt like a very polished, very corporate, very American soundbite.
It felt like it was for a social media clip rather than for the driver.
Exactly. Fans wanted to hear raw emotion, like when Max won his first title and his engineer was just screaming down the radio. Instead, they got a slogan.
And it did feel like it soured the moment a little bit for a lot of people. Some sources said it made the whole thing feel unenjoyable or underwhelming.
It's amazing how much impact one 7-word sentence can have, isn't it? It just dominated the conversation for a while.
It really did. But moving past the radio call, let's talk about the champion himself. Because the opinions on Lando's merit as a champion are just, well, they're completely split, aren't they?
They are completely contradictory, and we have to look at both sides. On the one hand, you have the advocates, the people who say this was absolutely well-deserved.
Right. They point to his loyalty to McLaren, his development over the years.
They highlight his stellar drives, a strong comeback in the second half of the season, and they praise him for showing new levels of steel, maturity, and resilience.
The argument is that he was nothing short of outstanding in those last 7 or 8 races.
Exactly. And that in Abu Dhabi, he did all he needed, which is to keep it clean. He managed the pressure perfectly. For them, he's a worthy champion who won through consistency.
But then there's the other side, and they were incredibly harsh.
Some of the language is very strong. He was called the most mid-driver ever, worst champion in years, and even the least talented WDC since Damon Hülkenberg.
Ouch, that's rough.
It is, and the core of that criticism is this idea that his championship was given, not earned, that he was spoon-fed what to do by the team.
And that criticism ties directly into the biggest controversy of the whole season, doesn't it? The papaya rules.
It all comes down to the maths of those 2 points. And this is where we have to dig into 2 specific moments. Max's mistake in Spain and the McLaren team order in Monza.
The Monza incident. This is what so many fans point to as the moment the championship was, quote, given to Lando.
Right, let's break it down. At Monza, Piastri was running ahead of Norris, P3 and P4. McLaren then made the call to swap them, citing that Norris had slightly better pace or tire life.
So Piastri was told to move over. Lando took P3. Oscar finished P4. What's the points difference there?
Well, P3 is 15 points, P4 is 12 points. So that one instruction gave Norris an extra 3 points and took 3 points away from Piastri.
A 6-point swing between the 2 teammates.
And this is the killer detail. The fans did the maths. If that swap had not happened, if Piastri had finished P3 and Norris P4 at Monza, Max Verstappen would have won the World Championship by 1 point.
1 point. The final standings would have been Max 421, Lando 420.
Blimey. It's the moment, isn't it? That single call is the fulcrum the whole championship balanced on.
It's the ultimate argument for Formula One being a team sport.
Absolutely. Lando won because McLaren, as a team, made less strategic blunders, and they had 2 drivers right at the front, which gave them that strategic flexibility.
Flexibility that Red Bull just didn't have.
Exactly. The contrast with Max is stark. Fans saw him as having to do this run practically by himself. Perez just wasn't there often enough to play that wingman role.
So while some call it being spoon-fed, others would call it ruthlessly effective team management.
That's the debate in a nutshell.
So let's talk about Max. He wins the final race but loses the war. The fan feeling towards him seems to be overwhelmingly positive.
Oh, massively. There's a really strong feeling that he was the true champion this year when you consider everything.
People praised him for fighting like absolute tigers to even get back into contention.
Yes, they're calling it the greatest comeback that almost was, coming back from being nearly 4 race wins behind in the points.
So, if Monza was Lando's crucial gain, what was Max's crucial loss? It all comes back to Spain, doesn't it?
It all comes back to Spain, the Circuit de Catalunya. So many fans are saying Barcelona will haunt us. It was a rare, unforced error from Max.
He ran wide, got a track limits penalty.
And that penalty dropped him from 2nd place down to 4th in the final results.
So instead of 18 points, he gets 12. A 6-point loss.
A 6-point loss from one mistake. And when you combine that with Lando's 3-point gain at Monza, you can see exactly where the championship was won and lost. One fan said it perfectly. No one else here to blame but Max for that particular error.
And yet, despite that frustration, fans gave him huge respect for how he drove the finale in Abu Dhabi.
They really did. There was a lot of surprise that he didn't try more tricks, backing Lando up into Leclerc or something like that.
He just drove a clean masterclass at the front.
He did. He focused on his own race, and I think people respected that.
And finally, we have to talk about Oscar Piastri, the ultimate team player, finishing P2 in the race but having been sacrificed earlier in the year.
Yeah, poor Oscar. The feeling is that he was robbed this year by the team orders, but that his time will definitely come.
People acknowledge he had a bit of a wobble mid-season, an absolutely historic fumble, as one source put it, that let Norris build a lead.
But the feeling is he's learned from it. He's gained that experience under pressure, and he'll be back stronger. He's probably Lando's biggest rival for the next few years.
He really is. It feels like this season proved that to beat a driver like Max, you need two drivers capable of winning. It's the new standard.
It absolutely is, and McLaren played that game perfectly.
So Lando Norris is the 2025 champion, and that brings the curtain down on this current set of regulations. And judging by our sources, nobody seems particularly sad to see them go.
No, there seems to be widespread, almost universal relief that the ground effect era is over.
The fan commentary is pretty damning, isn't it? People calling the cars hoofing awful, trash from start to finish.
One person wrote, "R.I.P. ground effect era, you were effing awful." The feeling is that it massively overpromised and underdelivered.
So why the backlash? These rules were meant to make the racing closer.
In theory, yes. But in practice, the cars had to be run so stiff and so low to the ground that they were apparently a nightmare to drive. Very twitchy.
They also got incredibly heavy.
Incredibly heavy, which hurts agility. And while they could follow a bit closer, the dirty air problem wasn't completely solved. So the racing often still felt quite processional and very reliant on DRS.
Which kind of defeats the point of the whole exercise.
It does. So everyone is just desperate to see the 2026 cars with the new engines, the active aero. It feels like a proper reset.
A reset that's badly needed. And it's not just the cars that fans want to see changed, is it? It's the calendar.
Specifically the finale. The feeling is overwhelming. Abu Dhabi should not be hosting the title decider anymore.
It just doesn't produce the drama, does it? When you have this incredibly close season and it ends with a fairly predictable, controlled race, it feels anticlimactic.
Hugely. Fans want chaos. They want unpredictability. They always suggest places like Interlagos in Brazil, where the weather can change everything in a heartbeat.
Or even one of the street circuits like Vegas or Singapore, where one tiny mistake puts you in the wall.
Exactly. You want a track that tests the drivers under pressure, and Yas Marina just, it doesn't really do that. The race itself was described as having no life whatsoever.
It's a shame. But despite the dull race, the final podium itself was actually incredibly rare, historically speaking.
This is a fantastic little detail. It was only the third time since the year 2000 that every driver who was still in with a shot at the title finished on the podium together.
So the others were 2021 with Max and Lewis.
And 2016 with Nico and Lewis. To have all three contenders, Max, Norris, and Piastri, all up there in P1, P2, and P3 is just exceptionally unusual.
It really emphasizes how close it was right to the very end. The top three in the championship were the top three in the race.
Precisely. And that leads us to a final point on the legacy of this championship. There's a common feeling that history will be kinder to Lando than the initial fan reaction has been.
Right. One source suggested that in a couple of years, people will look back and appreciate his achievement more, much like what happened with Max after his first title.
It's true, isn't it? The immediate raw emotion of the moment, the cringy radio call, the team orders, all of that will fade.
And what will be left in the history books is just the name. Lando Norris, 2025 World Champion.
History remembers the result, and the key thing history will remember is his resilience. He endured the pressure, he came back from setbacks like that DNF at Zandvoort, and he delivered a perfect, clean race when it mattered most.
That's what defines a champion at the end of the day. It wasn't always flashy, but it was relentlessly consistent.
And consistency plus ruthless team strategy is how you win a championship by 2 points. Hashtag outro.
So to wrap up this deep dive into the 2025 finale, we had a championship that was, without a doubt, incredibly tight on points, just 2 points. But a final race that, well, maybe lacked that on-track drama, culminating in a really bittersweet, strategically fascinating victory for McLaren.
And I think the season proved the central truth. Lando, despite the critics, showed he had the mentality of a champion when it really counted. But more than that, it proved the priceless value of a strong second driver and a near-perfect team operation.
Max was essentially fighting on his own.
He was. He was forced to drive that Red Bull almost by himself for much of the year. McLaren showed that in this era, having two top drivers and making almost zero mistakes is what separates a contender from a champion. They navigated that tightrope, and that is why Lando Norris won the title.
It all came down to those 2 points, a tiny margin decided by huge moments. So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought. We know the result now. If you could go back and change just one single moment, would you erase Max's unforced three-point error in Spain? Or would you erase the controversial but necessary three-point team order swap in Monza?
Which one single moment would you change, knowing it would swing the title by those critical 2 points?
Think about that. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
We'll catch you on the next one.